If, like Joel mentioned, the thing keeping us in a state of hubris is our fear of shame, then it might be good to talk about the antidote to shame. We're eating the elephant one bite at a time, not ignoring it. And the primary antidote to shame is empathy, at least according to Brené Brown. And one of the ways that we build empathy, which some of you may have heard is one of the leading problems plaguing our country right now, and that we need to get rid of the plague of empathy, but I'm here to tell you this is a super spreader event for the plague of empathy. So here we go. One of the ways that we build empathy is that we are in relationship with other people. And one of the ways that our congregation, that the fellowship, has been in relationship across difference since the 90s is that we have had international partner congregations. We have a partner congregation in Davao, Romania, and another partner congregation in Banay in the Philippines. Members of our congregations have traveled there, and delegations from their congregation have traveled here. We engage in cultural exchange. Some of you came to a middle hour session a few weeks ago where you got to see some of the many gifts that our congregation has received from our partners. You might be wondering, thinking to yourself, how do we have international partner congregations? And some of you might be thinking, I just found out about Unitarian Universalism and now there's Unitarian Universalists in other places. How? Tell me more. So here's the background. Our partner congregation in Davao, Romania is part of what is historically the Transylvanian Unitarian Church. And it was that denomination has been in that part of the world since the days of the Protestant Reformation, in the middle of the 1500s. And everybody protested the Catholic Church in their own special way. Everybody came out, that's how you get all the different flavors of Protestants that we have. And the flavor of Protestants that our partner church in Davao, Romania is that they were part of the Unitarian movement. And it's the two sort of foundational concepts about the Transylvanian Unitarian Church that have shaped who we are today is, first of all, that they were Unitarian rather than Trinitarian. They read the scriptures for themselves and said, I don't think Jesus said anything about the Trinity. He didn't. And the other was that they were strong advocates of religious toleration, of the idea of religious tolerance. And their version of religious tolerance was, would seem pretty milquetoast to many of us today, Their version in the 1560s of religious tolerance was that it was okay to be Catholic or a couple other flavors of Protestant. But if you think about what else was happening in Europe in the 1500s, you will perhaps remember that the idea that it was okay to be either Catholic or Protestant was radical at the time. And in 1568, King John Sigismund II issued the Edict of Torda, or the Edict of Toleration, which declared, and he was Unitarian himself, he was a Unitarian Christian, and it declared that it was the law. You had to tolerate whichever sect of Christianity somebody was, you couldn't, murder them over it. Which again, by today's standards, by the standards of the 1500s, quite radical. And so those beliefs about the oneness of God and the idea that we ought to tolerate different religions among our neighbors are foundational to American Unitarianism as it developed in the 17 and 1800s here. And so our neighbors there are deeply and explicitly Christian. They have a different structure because they came off a different branch of the Protestant family tree before we just kept protesting our way right out of Protestantism here as Unitarian Universalists. Right? But they are deeply and explicitly Christian. They have a church structure with bishops, and they are not Unitarian Universalist. They are Unitarian, full stop. So those are our partners in Deva in Romania. Our partners in Bani-Bani in the Philippines came into contact originally with Unitarianism and then eventually Universalism in the way that most pieces of Philippine culture came into contact with American culture through the United States colonization of the Philippines following the Spanish-American War and the Philippine-American War, right, where the United States committed what are largely agreed to be war crimes as part of the Philippine-American War and eventual occupation of the Philippines. And the sort of original contact with Unitarianism came with missionaries and other Unitarians who were in the Philippines sort of right after the end of the Philippine-American War, and that contact resulted in the creation of the Independent Church of the Philippines, or the Philippine Independent Church, that eventually found its way back into more traditional Protestantism and today is affiliated with the Episcopal Church. But then in the sort of the mid-20th century, there was a minister, and his name was the Reverend Toribio Queimada, and Toribio Queimada was seeking a different kind of Christianity, and eventually on a list of churches found Universalism and began correspondence with Universalists here in the United States, and eventually founded what was the Universalist Church of the Philippines and is now the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Philippines, which grew from one congregation into many. And that is the sort of religious lineage of our partner congregation in Bani-Bani. And so this colonial impulse that is part of who America has always been and is still today is kind of like the water we swim in. And when I think about who you are, and I think about the beautiful, deep, empathy-driven relational work that our congregation has done in partnership with our siblings in Deva and in Bani-Bani, I think, wow, like, that is so beautiful. That is what we want the world to be. But while we do that beautiful, empathy-driven work, we are swimming in the water. We are swimming in the water of the settler colonial impulse that Joel described, seeing on those historical markers, that was such a foundational idea in our country's founding, that the idea that that America could exist separate from it, even though in theory the settler colonial project has ended, I think we all know that it's still in the water. And the same is true in relationships between Americans and people in the Philippines. Colonialism is the water you swim in when you're in that relationship. You can't get away from it. And the UUA, the Unitarian Universalist Association, our denominational sort of parent body, has struggled to figure out what to do about that fact. Right, what to do about the fact that there is all of this beautiful empathy-driven partnership that has happened, but that it has all happened swimming in the water of colonialism. And the reality that part of how these partnerships have been formed over time has been, right, that wealthier American congregations have shared their financial resources with congregations in Eastern Europe and in the Philippines. And that in that process, though everyone involved acted with spectacular intentions, that the structures that were created to support these partnerships, not just in our congregation, but in dozens of UU congregations across the country, the structures that we set up to help support these partnerships, that for the most part, the Americans set the terms. And that's not surprising. I think anyone who, right, you're like, yeah, no, that is kind of our MO. We do that. And so but that's not who we actually want to be in the world. And so in the late aughts and sort of early 2010s, the UUA dissolved the UU Partner Church Council, which was the body that supported these relationships. Not because they didn't want anybody to have a partnership anymore, but because the water that the Partner Church Council swam in was rife with colonial baggage. They are trying, and we are trying, as a congregation that has international partners, are trying to eat an elephant, right? Trying to unravel the legacy of the colonial impulse. We can wrap it up by this afternoon, can't we? No? And so this story of how we came to have international partner congregations and the structures that supported them and what we're trying to figure out to do next, it's one of those problems, right? It's one of those things that seems too big and too broken. Right? You look at it and you think, how do you fix that? How are we going to completely unravel the grasp of the American colonial project? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. But I'm gonna give you like a little breakdown, like a little bit more of some maybe like footholds, some recipes, if you will, to help you eat that elephant one bite at a time. So here is what I see us doing. There's sort of 4 things. You gotta admit that it's broken. And that step is harder than you would think. How many of you have tried to have a conversation with somebody in your life about a broken and oppressive system, and you just cannot get them to admit that the system is broken? I see somebody laughing. Right? You know that struggle, right? So you have to admit that it's broken. Then, bummer, you have to realize that there's no silver bullets. There's no magic fix. There's no magic wand. It's going to be hard work. Then you have to open your heart and let yourself be radicalized to action. And then you have to do the next right thing. The first thing you have to do is admit that it's broken. When I started teaching middle school to English to speakers of other languages, the students that I taught were mostly recently arrived refugees from all over the world. And, I thought that I was pretty educated about imperialism and colonialism around the globe. I had taken fancy pants college classes about post-colonial literature and things like that. I thought, I understand this problem, and I'm against it. And I've changed nothing about how I move in the world as a result of being against it. But then I had a student, and his name was Amir, and Amir was not that recently arrived to the United States. Amir had been in the States for a couple of years, but he was in my newcomer class because he had significant behavioral and emotional challenges. Amir's family were refugees from Iraq. In what was deeply tragic but also sort of darkly comical, every time I tried to administer a test to Amir, he would simply just collapse. He would just refuse to take the test. You would try to do things, and mostly what Amir did was threaten you and then draw pictures of buildings on fire and people with weapons. And at some point, when I was able to overcome my deep frustration that the school administrators were breathing down my neck about how this child needed to take a mathematics benchmark exam, and realized that those people in Amir's pictures when you talk to him about them, some of them were American soldiers. And then I realized that American imperialism is not just an idea. It is something that had shaped this child's life. And that's when it's broken. It's not just broken because I learned about it in a classroom. It's broken because there's this child in front of me whose life has been irreversibly damaged by this. Right, and this is where I regret to inform you that it sort of gets like more of a bummer before it gets better, which is that then, right, you get angry about it. You're like, it's broken. And how many of us have railed to people about how the system is broken? And then they say, like, well, what are you going to do about it? And you're like, oh, crap. I got to do something about it. But there's no single solution out there, because the more I spent time in relationship with Amir and other students like him, students from the Congo, students from Nepal and Bhutan, students from Ethiopia and Eritrea, each places with profoundly intricate conflicts and conflict histories, is that there's no single solution. How many of us have felt that the deeper you dig, it just gets more complicated? The more you learn about the problem, the less solvable it seems. And how many of us stay there in despair? Or its convenient cousin, cynicism? Which is why we have to when we discover how broken it is, we've got to open our hearts. And I'm not afraid to use the phrase, you have to let yourself be radicalized. Because that is what teaching Amir and teaching, right, those other students, that's part of what it did to me, is that it radicalized me. It made me feel, right, it gave me a conviction so deep that I want to keep working on this problem even when it seems impossible and unfixable and unwise. Right? Because you have to sort of feel it at a bone-deep level in order to go against the water that you swim in. And then we have to do the next right thing. Spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about the ending of the movie Frozen 2. If you haven't seen Frozen 2 and you don't want to be spoiled, this is your chance to plug your ears. The movie Frozen 2 is actually a Disney movie about the troubling legacies of land theft and colonialism. In the story, Anna and Elsa discover that their father was a soldier from Arendelle, and their grandfather was a general from Arendelle, but that their mother was in fact part of a sort of allegorical indigenous people out in the woods. And when, right, a series of horrible things happen to Anna, she believes that everyone she loves is dead, right? She doesn't know, right? Everything is lost. Everything feels lost to her. Everything feels gone. And she realizes that the way she can undo the damage is to, right, that her grandfather built a dam, he built a dam against the wishes of the indigenous people in the story. And that her choice is to either do nothing or destroy the dam. And she sings a song about doing the next right thing. And that is my invitation for us. For us as we consider what it means not just to have international partners as we attempt to undo the legacy of colonialism in ourselves and our world. But my imagination tells me that many of you have thought of other problems, other elephants you wish to eat, other problems that feel too big, problems that feel genuinely unsolvable. And all we have to do, is the next right thing. One bite at a time, one day at a time. It's the next right thing. Because these are problems that, right, like we're not gonna solve, maybe, in our lifetimes. This is a problem that was not made in my lifetime, wasn't even made in many of your lifetimes, and we're not gonna solve it in my lifetime. But that doesn't mean I give up. It means that I do the next right thing. And I hope that we can be a people of doing the next right thing together. May it be so. Amen.